Good. Okay. Good. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll make a start. There's quite a lot of what I think is some fascinating material to get through. When you begin to look into this whole topic of Tefillin on Shabbos and Yom Tov and Chol Hamoed, so you start off, or certainly I started off with the idea of that. Well, it's okay, you don't wear Tefillin on Shabbos, but it turns there's actually a lot of really really relevant halachas about Tefillin on Shabbos, Hilchos Muktzah, all sorts of other areas, which is really a lot of halacha l'maisa here, and really worthwhile going through. It is of course also very nice, simply because in terms of the daf, this is I don't know if there's any other perek in Shas that actually has Tefillin in the name of the perek. This is if you like, the perek. Although we know that most of the halachas of Tefillin are not here; they're in Menachos, which we will refer to a little bit. But clearly, this Gemara contains some. It has the essence of Tefillin is in the name of the perek itself, and the sugya of Hamotzi. The sugya itself, the idea of Tefillin on Shabbos obviously features very prominently in the very first Mishnah, and it's really the first sugya. I'm not going to spend too long on the Gemara itself, simply because the main, if you like, the main chidushim I think here is actually in the halacha l'maisa. But let's just briefly remind ourselves of what the sugya is about. The Mishna on Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph. I'm just going to assume that you have in front of you a Gemara and Mishnah Berura. There is hopefully a Mishnah Berura. We'll be referring to a few other stories as well, but those are the main story. Mishnah Berura Chelek Aleph and Chelek Gimel. Yeah, those are the two. If you can, if not, we'll go through it. But it's just and that's what I'm going to be using mainly, and obviously the Gemaras as well. So let's just mute anyone. There we go. Okay, fine. Yeah, right. So the Mishnah says, Tefillin b'sadeh b'mokom shnei avodim. Rashi says, if one person finds Tefillin, Rashi says in a field, in a place that will be lost, machnison zug. You bring them in pair by pair, le'ir or le'bayis, to a city, and to a city and to the house. When I come back to that Rashi a bit later on, Rashi is very specific in his description of the circumstances of these lost pair of tefillin. He talks about a field, and you're bringing them into a town, into a city. That's the case, the scenario. That's the scenario, and the question is, how do you bring them in? The Tanna Kama says you bring them in zug, pair at a time. In other words, the normal way you'd wear tefillin, one pair at a time. Remah and M'B says shnaim, and it goes on, etc. Okay, and that is the Mishnah, and the Gemara seeks to understand what exactly the machlokas is between the Tanna Kama and Remah and M'B, and through that gets onto the question of perhaps the debate between them is on whether Shabbos is Zman Tefillin. The Gemara introduces that at the bottom of Tzadi Hey Amud Beis, whether we say Shabbos is Zman Tefillin or is not Zman Tefillin, in the sense that if you hold, and it goes on. In other words, the first way the Gemara approaches it is simply to say that the Tanna Kama holds Shabbos itself is a Zman Tefillin, and it's because it is a Zman Tefillin. It's a time when you can fulfill the mitzvah of Tefillin. Maybe according to Tanna Kama there is a mitzvah of Tefillin on Shabbos. If so, there'll be a problem with Baal Tosef, and you won't be able because there's a problem with Baal Tosef, you can't wear two pairs at once. That's why the Tanna Kama doesn't hold of the two pairs at once. The adding onto the mitzvah, wearing the extra pair of tefillin, it potentially will make it into a burden, and you'll end up you'll be treated as carrying them. Whereas Remah and M'B holds that it's not as Zman Tefillin, you're only wearing them as an adornment as such, and therefore, as long as you're wearing them as an adornment, it's okay, and there's no question of Baal Tosef because there's no mitzvah at all. It's Shabbos. If you hold Shabbos, is not the Zman Tefillin. The Gemara then goes through various different ways of different possible solutions. It talks about you can say everyone holds Shabbos is a Zman Tefillin, and it goes into whether mitzvah shlichus kavana or not. Okay, we're going to go to where the main point that concerns us is, which is Tzadi Vov Amud Aleph. Tzadi Vov Amud Aleph. The Gemara asked, it's about a third of the way down. The Gemara says, "Man shamasle." Shabbos man tefillin. Who is the one who holds that Shabbos is a zman tefillin? Who holds that Shabbos is a time when you can fulfill the mitzvah tefillin? The mitzvah tefillin itself applies on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, it's Rabbi Akiva. It's Rabbi Akiva. The Sanya, the Brisa says, the Pasuk says in Shmos that when the mitzvah tefillin is first given to Klal Yisrael, you shall protect this statute in its appointed time, yomim from day to day, yomim v'lo leilos. This we learn from here: day and days are not nights. Miyomim from the days v'lo kol yomim, not all the days. That's miyomim. So yomim tells you not nights, and miyomim tells you not all days. This excludes Shabbosos and Yomim Tovim. Part of Shabbosos Yomim Tovim. Rabbi Yossi Aglili. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili clearly says Shabbos is not a zman tefillin. You cannot wear tefillin on Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva says Lo nemachuka zu ele in Pesach bilvad. This pasuk is only talking about Pesach. It is not talking about tefillin. It's talking about the psukim beforehand talk about Pesach, and therefore he says the pasuk is not talking about tefillin at all. So the Gemara wants to try and infer from that Rabbi Akiva holds potentially both nighttime and Shabbos is a zman tefillin. You can fulfill the mitzvah tefillin at nighttime. You can fulfill the mitzvah tefillin on Shabbos because he doesn't use the pasuk for that purpose. So the Gemara then goes on to ask questions on this. But there's a Mishna which says that the Pesach and Milah is a mitzvah aseh, and the Gemara says if it's in other words, they're only a mitzvah aseh. If Rabbi Akiva says v'shomarta, you shall guard this statute, is talking about Pesach, that means he holds it's a loisa aseh as well, because v'shomarta means a loisa aseh. The Gemara says no, because I'm just sort of going through this quickly. The Gemara says no, because Rabbi Akiva, when you have the word Tishomer in proximity to an aseh, to a positive mitzvah, you can actually understand that it is an aseh and it's not a love. Fine. The problem, there's a more fundamental problem, says the Gemara, with suggesting that Rabbi Akiva is the one who holds that Shabbos is zman tefillin. And what is that? That is the following brisa. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva Shabbos zman tefillin. Is it true that Rabbi Akiva holds that Shabbos is a time you can fulfill mitzvah tefillin? But Tani, the brisa says, and this is the second source for not wearing tefillin on Shabbos. First one we've had is the word exclusion from the posuk miyomim, and not all days. Days are not all days, excluding Shabbos and Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Yochol Yonei Chodem Tefillin Shabbos and Yom Tov. You might think a person should wear tefillin on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Talmud Lomer, the posuk says, shall be a sign on your hand, on your arm. Only those days which require a sign and ois. That excludes these days which are themselves an ois. They are themselves a sign. Shabbos and Yom Tov themselves are signs, and therefore tefillin, and therefore there is no. You do not wear tefillin on those days which are already a sign as such. Okay, so the Gemara has decided that Rabbi Akiva cannot be the one who holds that Shabbos is in fact zman tefillin. The Gemara goes in searching for another Tana who could possibly be the one who holds that Shabbos is zman tefillin, goes through to try and discover whether it is someone else. And the conclusion of the Gemara is that, the Gemara seems to conclude anyway that Remah and M'B certainly seem to hold that I think as far as I think so, Remah and M'B can certainly hold that Shabbos is zman tefillin. That the Gemara goes and infers that from the fact that women are able to wear tefillin. In other words, the Gemara says, therefore you see it's not a time-bound mitzvah. The Gemara goes into this, it goes, and therefore obviously must hold this obligation on Shabbos. The Gemara goes and finds its opinion in that way. So the main thing we need to take out of this Gemara for our purposes is that we have two sources for not wearing tefillin on Shabbos. We have the exclusion yomim, right? This is according to the one who says Shabbos loves man tefillin, which is how we paskin. So one source is Yomim, Miyomim, and not all days. That excludes Shabbos and Yom Tov. And the other one is the one which is people are more familiar with in a sense. The source is La'os. And Tefillin are a sign. Shabbos you don't need a sign because Shabbos themselves are a sign. Now the Gemara in Menachos also discusses, goes through the same sugya. Menachos is Lamed Vov Omid base. It's not exactly the same, but it is the other primary place that this is discussed. Brings the brisa of Rabbi Akiva, and it says that the one we just mentioned about the fact that Shabbos is an ois, and therefore there's no mitzvah to wear tefillin on Shabbos. And the Gemara brings a story of Rav Ashi. It's only a few lines in the Gemara. I know you don't have Menachos there, but let me just read you these few lines, or maybe you do. I don't know. It says like this: V'Omar Ravino. Ravino said, "Havi Yosivno Kamed Rav Ashi." I was sitting in front of Rav Ashi, v'choshach, and it got dark. V'eniach tefillin, and he put on his tefillin. V'omri lei, and I said to him, even though it was dark, right? It was getting dark. V'omri lei, and I said to him, L'shomron kaboy lehumar. Does the master want to wear his tefillin to protect them, to guard them? V'omali, and he said to me, yes, I'm doing it in order to look after them, to protect them. Was this
Erev Shabbos, Rabbi?
No, this was during the day. It was just nighttime. You'll see.
Friday.
Pardon? No, not a Friday. Not a Friday. It is a weekday.
Regular day.
But he was questioning how he could wear tefillin at night, right? So he said to him, "Are you wearing them just to keep them safe? You know, you're worried you'll lose them in the dark or whatever, something like that. You're just doing it to protect them." And he said to me, "Yes, that's why I'm wearing them." I saw and I looked carefully at the way he was acting to love L'Shaman Huboy. I was able to work out that he wasn't really wearing them in order to protect them. Kasovar, and he really held Halacha ve'ein morin came. That the Halacha is, right, that nighttime is Azman Tefillin. You can fulfill the mitzvah Tefillin at night, but ve'ein morin came. But we don't paskin that way. We don't paskin it publicly in public. So secretly, undercover, he was wearing his tefillin at night, right? That was what Rav Ashi was doing. That is where the Gemara concludes. And the reason why it's halacha ve'emer in Cain, the halacha is like that, we don't publicize that. So Rashi says, in case a person would forget, Shema Ishkachem v'yoshem b'hem, will go to sleep in them, right? And that's the concern. And that's the concern. So the reason why that Gemara is important is because it helps us work out what is the primary reason why we hold Shabbos, right, is not as Azman Tefillin. Okay, so we have to put that on that little story of Rav Ashi, which is not about Shabbos, it's just about nighttime. The conclusion of the Gemara Menachos seems to be, right, that although Shabbos is not as Azman Tefillin, like Rabbi Akiva says, yeah, because you have an ois and tefillin is an ois, and you can't, if you don't know on Shabbos, you don't want tefillin, right? But Laila, nighttime, could be is Azman Tefillin, okay? Could be is Azman Tefillin, right? That doesn't mean we practically speaking wear tefillin, and that we don't for other reasons, as even the Gemara says. But we come back to that. We'll come back to that in a minute. So let's have a look at the Shulchan Aruch. Let's have a look at the Shulchan Aruch. Let's have a look at Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is in siman Lamed Aleph. Yeah, siman Lamed Aleph, Sif Aleph. Din tefillin b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov. Yeah, everyone got a copy of the chance to open Mishna Berura there? Yeah. Says the Mishna Berura says the Shulchan Aruch like this. B'Shabbos v'Yom Tov osur lohaniach tefillin. Shulchan Aruch says on Shabbos v'Yom Tov it's osur, it's forbidden to wear tefillin. Mipnei shehem atzmam os, because they themselves, that means Shabbos and Yom Tov themselves, are a sign. They are a sign, as the Gemara, as we said in the reason given Rabbi Akiva. If you wear another sign, if you put on another sign, what you end up doing is you end up cheapening the sign that they are. The ois of Shabbos, you detract from if you end up wearing the sign that is you end up wearing another sign, effectively wearing tefillin, right? What do you see? What do you see from the Shulchan Aruch before we even see any further, Mishna or anything else? What is the reason, right? Which reason do we paskin like? Any idea? It's clear, right? What's the reason? What was reason? There were two reasons we gave in the Gemara why you don't wear tefillin on Shabbos, right? Yomim, right? Mi yomim, which excludes daytimes from the days, excludes not every day, so that excludes Shabbos and Yom Tov. And the second reason we gave, right, was because of ois. Yeah, so clearly the second one. What?
The second one.
Yeah, right. That's clear. Okay, that's clear. Now, what is important here to understand is that we see from here. How does the Shulchan Aruch know that the halacha is like, and that we follow the second reason? And it's got very important practical differences. So the Bir HaGra in Siman Shin Aleph, if Koton Yud Ches, explains as follows, that he says like this, he says, you see from the Gemara in Menachos that Rav Ashi, there's a story of Rav Ashi. A story is always very powerful. When the Gemara makes a story, it's a Ma'aser Rav. The Gemara says, it brings out that Rav Ashi held that the halacha is that Laila, nighttime, is a zman tefillin, right? That Laila, at the nighttime, you can, in theory, wear tefillin. It's just for a Murinkim. We don't pass on it for another reason. You might fall asleep in them or whatever, so we don't do it. But in theory, nighttime per se is a zman tefillin. If that's the case, says the Vilna Gaon, if that's the case, then it must be that we don't learn the reason for the exclusion, of tefillin from the source of Rabbi Yossi HaGlili. Rabbi Yossi HaGlili brings the posuk miyomim and yomimo, right? That you exclude from there both nighttime and you exclude Shabbos. But we don't. Rav Ashi holds that nighttime is per se as zman tefillin. And in fact, in the previous siman lamed, in siman lamed, it talks about the reason siman lamed sifbei says also laniach tefillin balaylo. You can't wear tefillin at night. Shema yishkachem v'yishen bohem, right? Shema yishkachem, you forget v'yishen bohem, right? Yeah, you forget and you might fall asleep. That's the concern. But per se, nighttime is a time for wearing tefillin, and only Shabbos isn't. That means, says the Vilna Gaon, that we must paskin like Rabbi Akiva, right? We paskin like Rabbi Akiva. The reason why you don't wear tefillin on Shabbos is nothing to do with yomim yomimo. It's nothing to do with this the per se the exclusion itself of that posuk, right? And that means that the reason why we don't wear tefillin is simply because tefillin is an ois and Shabbos is not, and Shabbos you don't need. Shabbos is an ois of their own right. Okay, you'll tell me, so what? Well, what's the difference? What's the difference? Okay, so nice. So we worked out by a process of elimination. We worked out that that's the reason why you don't wear tefillin on Shabbos. What's the practical nafkamina? The nafkamina is huge. There's a huge difference to halacha, because if you say the reason you can't wear tefillin on Shabbos is the posuk of yomim yomimo, right? That means you're not allowed to. It's excluded. You're not allowed. It's forbidden to wear tefillin, right? If you say yomim yomimo, it says days, not nights. Mi yomim, the days, not all the days. That excludes Shabbos and Yom Tov, right? But if you say the reason is because of an ois, says the Vilna Gaon, it's not forbidden to wear them. It's just not a mitzvah, right? It's just not a mitzvah. You're not fulfilling a mitzvah. Yeah, you have another ois. That's what the reason given according to Rabbi Akiva is you might think a person should wear tefillin on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Talmud Lema excludes these days that they themselves are a sign. So there is no mitzvah to wear tefillin on Shabbos and Yom Tov.
But Rabbi, so that's very different. The lashon of the Shulchan Aruch is that it's a zilzul. That's even,
yes. The Shulchan Aruch
that's even stronger than saying there's no mitzvah to it. It's actually gone one step further and saying it's a zilzul to to wear it.
Exactly. So the key, obviously, so that's the obvious question, right? Shulchan Aruch says clearly, osa, it says osa, it says forbidden, right? So the question is, if you're wearing them, not l'shem mitzvah. That's the question. The Vilna Gaon understands the critical question is, why are you wearing them? If you're wearing them to fulfill a mitzvah, for the mitzvah of Tefillin, that's the zilzul in Shabbos and Yom Tov. You're turning around to Shabbos and Yom Tov, right? That are themselves a sign, ki osi beini uvein bnei Yisrael. They are a sign, and you're saying, hold on a minute, I've got a different sign. That's, I'm filling Tefillin as a mitzvah, a different ois I'm choosing. You can't do that. That's a zilzul of Shabbos. And that's, as the Vilna Gaon is what the Shulchan Aruch is talking about, right? But if, let's say, you, for whatever reason, you wanted to wear tefillin not as a mitzvah, you clearly said, I'm not intending to fulfill a mitzvah, according to Vilna Gaon, that would be allowed. He's not saying it's recommended behavior, it would be allowed.
Doesn't that bring back the whole thing about Baal Tosef? Doesn't that bring back the whole issue of mitzvahs, lav tzrichos kavana? Then whether you intend to fulfill the mitzvah by wearing them or not, you've done the mitzvah. You can't ignore these points.
So these points are all very important, The basic understanding is that when you have explicit, at least that's how the Vilna Gaon, we have to understand the Vilna Gaon, you have explicit, what we call kavana negdis. You have explicit kavana, right? You clearly say that you're doing it, whether it has to be mental or verbal, whatever, that this is not for the purpose of a mitzvah, okay? So therefore there's no Baal Tosef because it's not a mitzvah. In fact, because you're not doing it for a mitzvah, and it also won't be. We don't have to go into the whole thing of a mitzvah shrichas kavana or not, because you're not intending. There is no intention. You're specifically saying you're not intending it to be a mitzvah. Okay. Again, this seems like a very fine point, but it's really critical because it's the point upon which the whole question of muktzah, the status of tefillin on Shabbos, as to whether they're muktzah, it turns on this point. Okay, so we have to get there. That's why this is important, right? We started off with the two reasons in the Gemara. Okay, we clarified. Shulchan Aruch says clearly that we hold like Rabbi Akiva. That's clear. Says that clearly, right? That the reason is because of an ois, because of a sign. Yeah, and the upshot of that, the big difference, according to the Vilna Gaon, not everyone agrees, as we'll see. According to Vilna Gaon, right? The big difference is that that it's not forbidden to wear tefillin on Shabbos and Yom Tov if you do, as long as you do not intend to fulfill a mitzvah. Because if you don't intend to fulfill a mitzvah, you're not cheapening Shabbos, because you're not producing another sign. I'm not doing it for a mitzvah, and we'll see that has relevance to their status in terms of muktzah, the unique status that tefillin has in terms of muktzah. Okay, so let's see the Mishnah Berura, and we'll skip the muktzah bit because we'll come back to that in a minute. So Mishnah Berura says the Yom Tov Sheini Nami Bichlal. He says Yom Tov Sheini is also included. L'dobnei chutzar, same status, right? Same thing. Osolaniach, you're not allowed to wear tefillin. Va'afilu b'tiltul. Oh, sorry, that's the one I want to skip. Sorry, I want to skip Sifkot and Beis. I'll come back to that. Shehein Atza. We'll go to Gimel first. Shehein Atzmam Os. What does it mean? They're a sign. Bein HaKadosh Baruch Hu ve'in Yisrael. Shnei Ki Osi bein Yivagomer. They're a sign. V'Yom Tov Nagam Ki Mikri Os. So he says, okay, you also see the Yom Tov is called a sign because in Pesach Mitzrayim it says Ois. V'Hukshu Kol Ma'odei Hashem Parshas Emor. All of the Yomim Tovim are, they're compared in Parshas Emor. They're all listed in one, so therefore they're all grouped together. They're all a sign. Okay, everything's a sign, and therefore you can't wear another sign. That's tefillin where it says there should be a sign on your hand. So now, what does it mean, the zilzul? So here's the zilzul. Zilzul. So the Mishnah Berura says the gam over mishum lav to Baal Tosef, as Danny said, right? You're going to be over the lav of Baal Tosef if you end up wearing tefillin on Shabbos. But says the Mishnah Berura, v'hu sheinichon l'shem mitzvah. That's only if you put them on for a mitzvah purpose. Aval b'manichon shlo l'shem mitzvah. If you put them on not to fulfill the mitzvah. Ein ba mishum Baal Tosef. There's no Baal Tosef. V'gam mishum zilzul ein ba. There's no zilzul either. You're not cheapening Shabbos. Im lo shem menichon b'char hesya. Unless you put them on in public. That is a bach, and it's also a pre-megodim in siman shin ches, that if you put them on in public, those also midrabanon. Then it will be also midrabanon, presumably because of the what it looks like in terms of what you're doing to Shabbos, effectively through doing so. V'yesh machmirin b'chol gavne, he says, but there are those who are machmir in every case, unless they are in a place of disgrace. The classic case of someone who finds tefillin in the field on Shabbos, he's allowed to wear them and put them on and bring them into the city through wearing them, as is explained later on in siman shin aleph, right? In siman shin aleph. There, it talks about this point, which is not really the primary. I didn't really want to focus so much on the case of finding lost tefillin, because although I've already shared with us a fascinating story, I think it's fair to say it is pretty unusual to find tefillin in the field. But nevertheless, the source for it is siman shin aleph sif mem beis, in a place where it talks about different parameters. Is it a case where it's there's a gezerah not to wear tefillin? What do you do there? Whatever. And basically you're allowed to do, you bring them in pair by pair, right? Whilst wearing them. Yeah. And here and the principle, by the way, the Mishna says there is the same. The Mishna says the same thing there. That even though we hold Shabbos is not zman tefillin, the fact is, when you wear them as you wear them in a weekday, it's not considered a burden. It's like an adornment. There's also no problem with Baal Tosef because you're not intending to fulfill a mitzvah. So you're not doing anything. That's what you do. Now everyone agrees that in a case where the tefillin are going to be damaged, like with the case of the field, that you can wear them in that case. That's the leniency. That's the main sugya at the beginning of this parak of Eruvin. But the Mishnah Berura here has brought two views as to whether or not there is whether it's also to wear them in a case where they are not bizoyan, right? They're not in a case of where they're going to be disgraced. Are you not allowed or not to wear tefillin on Shabbos? And it is on this point that the question of muktzah turns, because he says like this, that if you let's go back now to this, the bit I missed out. Sivkot base. Osaloniach, you're not allowed to wear tefillin, but afilu b'tiltul, even to carry them, to move them, as in muktzah, yesh omrim gam kein da'oser. Some say it's forbidden. Im lo letzorech gufam u'mekomom, unless for the sake of them themselves, or for you need to use them for something, or mekomom, or their place. Kishar kli. Like any other kli, any other implement that is designed for a forbidden purpose. Tefillin, according to that view, have the same status. Yeah, and therefore you'll be very limited in where you can move them. The yesh omrim, but some say the kadei shelo yiplu or shelo yignovum, in order they don't fall down, or they're not stolen. Nami mutar talton or mokum. You're also allowed to move them from place to place. Now that is something unique. That is difficult to understand, because generally speaking, items that are muktzah on Shabbos, cannot be moved for their own protection. Some say they can. Tefillin can be. He says if it's a difficult situation, you can be lenient in this regard. Now, the Halacha here explains the points that I've been making about what exactly the point of this machlokas is. He says like this: the source of this din, says the Halacha, the first one, Osalaniach. He says, look later on Shin Ches Sif Dalet in the Taz and the Mogen Avrom. He says, he says he paskins like the stringent opinion. You can only move them if for their purposes or for the place they are on. We'll see what that means. Well, I think we'll have some examples of that maybe soon. The Chaim says that if they won't fall over, to prevent them falling down, or so they wouldn't be stolen, and so does Mashrim Megodim. Now, these are the critical lines. This halacha is explained clearly in Siman Shin Ches. It's dependent on this point, this very point that I mentioned in the Vilna Gaon, right? Is it forbidden to wear tefillin on Shabbos Yom Tov if you do not intend to fulfill a mitzvah? The Vilna Gaon is one of the lenient view here. Therefore, he is also lenient when it comes to muktzah. As I've written inside. The Vilna Gaon holds that you are potentially, as long as you intend not to fulfill a mitzvah, it's okay. You'd be allowed to wear them. It wouldn't be a zilzal of Shabbos. You'd be allowed to wear them, right? Again, not that it's advisable. How can you touch them? No, you're allowed to put them on. They're not muktzah. That's the point. They're not muktzah. You see, according to Vilna Gaon, right? They cannot be muktzah. Why? Because I've got to use them on Shabbos. By definition, a klisha malachtu le'esa, a vessel which is used for a forbidden purpose. The definition of that, right? A pen. It has no useful, permitted purpose on Shabbos. Therefore, I can't use it. The only way I can move it is, unless it's something expensive, which is some kiss, a different level, right? But something that, a pen, I can move it. Right? If I need the pen to do something, I don't know what, to scratch my head with or whatever my hair with, right? Okay, that's the hammer to crack nuts example. That's a tzorech gufa, yeah? Or I need the place the pen is on. Someone forgot and left the pen on the Shabbos table. I need the place where the pen is on, yeah? So you can move it for those purposes. Otherwise, forbidden to move completely. It's completely muktzah. How on earth can it be that tefillin you can move, according to the lenient opinions, right? The Mekir. How can you move tefillin if you're worried that for their own purposes, because you're worried they might get damaged? The answer is, because if you must be that opinion holds that tefillin are not muktzah. Why? Because there is a case where I'm allowed to wear them if I'm not intending to fulfill a mitzvah. And that goes back to this very point of Rabbi Akiva's reason in the Gemara. You've got to trace it back that way. As we said, the whole purpose of the shiur is from the daf to the halacha, right? You've got to trace it backwards, yeah? As Michael came up with this, your father Darren came up with this lovely picture of this, the needle, right? But it's really like that. It's really like that. It's a very, very sort of fine weaving process to get from the daf to the halacha. That reason of la'os, that's how, again, following the line of Vilna Gaon, I'm not saying there are others, I would say there are cholkim here, but this is how the Vilna Gaon learns that, and you see, by the way, why it's called the Vilna Gaon. The genius of the Vilna Gaon in these areas is unbelievable. It's incomprehensible. I mean, the way he puts this all together is incredible. The idea that Shabbos is the exclusion, and the reason why you don't wear them is only because of the problem of ice, of a sign. If you haven't got a problem of a sign because you're not wearing them for a shein mitzvah, I'm no cheapening of Shabbos. I'm not contradicting the sign issue. Now, if you open your Mishnah Berura siman shin ches sif daled, so this is the parallel piece, right, in Hilchos Shabbos about to this sif here, and
which siman?
Sorry, siman shin ches. Shin ches. Sorry, Hilchos Shabbos shin ches sif daled.
Yeah.
Not a short one.
No, but we're not doing just doing a few lines of it. So it's just before we do that, sorry, I'm just looking at the second Biur Halacha in the one we were just looking at. He goes through and brings out that the Bach also says that there's no Isser even midrabanon to wear tefillin as long as you're not intending to fulfill a mitzvah. And then he brings the Vilna Gaon there as well, clearly, that it's okay. Now, the Shulchan Aruch here, leave the Shulchan Aruch, it's the Remah. Okay, so skip the first few lines. Hagah, where it says Hagah. Can you see that? Yeah, where the Remah is, right? You got that, Sif Daled, like 3 lines in, yeah? The Remah says, Utfilin ein letaltalam, you're not allowed to move tefillin, kiyim letzorech, only if necessary, right? What does that mean? Says the Mishnah Berura. This Mishnah Berura is Sivkot and Chof Dalet. Kiyum letzorech. Hainu kidei shelo yigonvu. That is in order they shouldn't be stolen. Oy shelo yiskalkelu b'chama v'kiyotze bozeh. They shouldn't be ruined in the sun and similar cases. V'hatazim ogan Avram machmir nusoverin. Now this is the machlokas, right? He brings it again here. The Taz and the Mogen Avram are stringent, and they hold the tefillin mikri klishim lachto le'issa. They hold that tefillin are called a klisha malachta le'issa. They're like a pen, lahavdil, right? So you got no permitted use on Shabbos or Yom Tov at all. They're osel anichon b'Shabbos because you're not allowed to wear them on Shabbos. What does that mean? Now here he spells out what that means. What does it mean? He's worried that they should protect him from damaging spirits, demons and things, right? That's the tzorech gufon. He's not putting them on, but he wants them near him, the tefillin, to protect him in that way. Interesting that you can even use tefillin for that. Okay, that's another question, right? This is a different. There are obvious questions you can ask it, but anyway, that's what that would be a case. He's struggling also to find a case of l'tzorech gufon. Are you with me? The pen example. Yeah, I said you want the pen to scratch your hair, okay, or the hammer to crack nuts. What are you going to do with the tefillin? Yeah, what are you going to do with the tefillin, right? Other than wear them, right? What else would you do with them? So the answer is you want them near you to protect you in some way, right? That's the only case you might. That's the tzorech gufon with tefillin, where you want them for some other purpose, right? Olim koman, you need the place they're on. Nevertheless, is mokom adachak. In a case of difficulty, as I said earlier, the Mishna says, right, that if it's a difficult situation, then you can move them. Like the first opinion, that allows you to move the tefillin even so they don't get stolen or they don't get ruined in the sun. Now, the outcome of this is some very important practical halachas. Like this. Let me give you some examples. You forget to take out your talis. Person has only one talis, right? And he forgets. That's the classic one, right? You forget to take your talis out of your tefillin bag. What do? Okay, so he brings this is all brought in the dirshu in the notes there. Fantastic notes. They bring this in the notes here. He says that to move your talis. He says to take the talis out. You want to move the bag in order to move the talis. The Shulchan says it's mutter, right? It's mutter. Why? Because that's moving a klisha malachta le'issa. That's the same rule. He says you don't even need to come on to the lenient opinion there, right? That's the same as moving it l'tzorech gufay. I need it to get my talis out, right? But he says l'chatchila. He brings the Kaf Chaim who says better to try and take it out, obviously, before Shabbos. But in the event that you didn't, you can move it in order to remove your talis. Okay. What about tefillin have fallen on the ground? If chas v'shalom that's happened on Shabbos, says Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in Halichas Shlomo, you're allowed to pick them up. You're allowed to pick them up, but you should put them immediately in a place that they won't come to anything that something might happen to them. The place where they'll be safe and won't come to a bizoin any disrespectful something disrespectful happen to them. But the Chazon Ish, he brings the name of the Chazon Ish, who says that he says you're allowed. That, by the way, Rosh Hashanah seems to be following there the lenient view. Again, to lift up tefillin, I know that sounds counterintuitive. You think, of course, I have to lift up the tefillin. Again, if you lift up tefillin on Shabbos directly, that means you are moving muktzah for its purpose, which is never normally allowed. So Rosh Hashanah presumably is relying on the lenient opinion, right? That you're allowed to move it to protect the tefillin. The Chazon Ish has a different solution, which enables you not to have to rely on that. He says you're allowed to lift them up if you think afterwards you intend when you do so to use the place that they were on. Okay, because that means you're moving them to tzorech makomai. I want the place that tefillin were on. That's an interesting question, by the way, as well in moving muktzah. Can you do that? In the first instance, you intend to do it. The tzorech makomai. You found a way of being able to move them. Okay, different question. Another very important example where this might be relevant is and again, this can be relevant, for example, in a hotel room. Someone wants to take tefillin out of the room on Shabbos, forgets or whatever. Obviously for intimacy, tefillin can't be there. So you're allowed to remove the tefillin from the room on Shabbos. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says in Shabbos Kelchosa, you're allowed to do so. Why? Because they're disturbing one's use of the room, and therefore one is allowed to move the tefillin out of the room. That's again because that's called tzorech makoma. You need the place effectively where they're in. However, there is a Nissan Karel. It says obviously it's better if you can just cover them with two coverings. You wrap them with two coverings. That's another that will also that is a better way of doing it, then you don't need to move them, and it means it's okay. Now, another interesting shaila, Shlomo Zalman talks about a case where someone needs to leave the house on Shabbos very suddenly, okay? And he's going to go somewhere, and he knows he's not going to be back till Sunday or Monday. Some emergency, he's got to move out of the house on Shabbos. I don't know what it is. Maybe he's going to, I don't know, it could be, I don't know, his wife's gone to labor and the hospital's miles. I don't know, whatever. It's unusual that case nowadays. Nowadays, we'd say come back once Shabbos to get your tefillin, whatever. But let's say you know you're not going to have your tefillin with you for whatever reason, okay? Are you allowed to take your tefillin with you on Shabbos? That's a good shaila. That's a good shaila. What do you think?
Achona?
What?
The achona?
Yeah, it's achona. Obviously we're talking where there's an eruv, so let's leave that to the side, obviously, right? But you're worried about achona, okay? Yeah, what? Yeah, and what you say? Okay, yeah, it's potentially a problem of hachana. But interesting enough, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says again in Shulchan Shlomo that you're allowed to take a tefillin with you. Amazing. Why? He says mitzvah's tefillin pushes away the issa of muktzah, right? When you couldn't sort it out before Shabbos came in. Some emergency happened, right? You had no way of doing this, of predicting this. Amazing. He says you can take your tefillin with you. Okay. And he says also, Shlomo Zalman also says that basically, and this all seems to be in reliance upon this Vilna Gaon. That's why I said that is so critical to this. He says, because there are major poskim who hold, and including them the Vilna Gaon as well, that allow you to wear tefillin on Shabbos as long as you don't intend to fulfill a mitzvah, and that means the tefillin are not a kli shalach Torah, so that's why you can move them b'shas hadchak in a difficult situation. Yeah. So there you are. So I mean, although when we sort of started this with the Gemara and the Vilna Gaon, and you think where's this going with this? Why on earth would someone wear tefillin on Shabbos and not b'shem mitzvah? The answer is they wouldn't, right? But it's important and relevant because you learn many halachas from this. Okay, we've got the two opinions as to whether you're allowed to move them to Mishnah Paskins that lechatchila you should treat them as muktzah, right? Only move them if you need. Well, I say tzorech gufam is very unusual. We have this case where you need to protect you from the mazikin, right? Usually it's going to be tzorech makom. I need the place they're on. I can move them if I need the place they're on, right? And we said it will be the same thing if I need to move them in order to take my talis out, right? Now. The case where but in a situation of shas hadchak, it's a difficult situation. Then you have the Vilna Gaon to rely on, who says that they're not muktzah, and you can move them, let's say, even to protect the tefillin, or some of the other examples we've given. We don't really have very much time left to see Chol Hamoed. We can run through it very, very briefly, just to cover the main views, just to keep the topic. Complete the topic. Is everyone all right with that? We got a few minutes to do that. Okay, fine. So let's just see Sif base briefly. On Chol Hamoed, says the Shulchan Aruch, on Chol Hamoed, gam kein osel oniach tefillin. On Chol Hamoed, it is also forbidden to wear tefillin. From this reason itself. Shiyamei Chol Hamoed gam heim ois. Why? Because Chol Hamoed is also an ois. Shulchan Aruch paskins Chol Hamoed is an ois forbidden to wear tefillin. Hagos says the Remah v'yesh omrim. Some say Chol Hamoed chayav b'tefillin. Chol Hamoed you are chayav to wear tefillin. V'chein nagim chol gelilos elu. He says that's how we are. The meaning is in all these countries anicham hamoed to wear them on Chol Hamoed and avorech aleim, and even to make a brach on them. That's the opinion of the Remah. Ela she'ein avorechim aleim b'koi rom. You don't make a bracha with a loud voice, but in shul like the rest, like you do the rest of the year. He says you make the bracha quietly. That is the opinion of the Ramah. Now, those of you who had the chance to see this, this is based on this Tosfos. Tosfos in Sadi Vovim at Aleph. It comes in other places, I think, as well. I think it's also in Menachos. And effectively, he says. Interestingly enough, Tosfos there seems to understand that we're relying on this. He also takes on that the key drosha, the key source for not wearing tefillin is this idea of ois. He even says this idea of yomim prat l'Shabbos v'Yom Tov is actually relying upon the drosha of the source of la'os al yodcho. They should be a sign on your hand. That's the key point. And therefore he says, this is the Tosfos, because it doesn't need a sign, because there are restrictions on Chol Hamoed that are also sign-like, in the sense that you can't do certain melachos, you can't do certain things on Chol Hamoed, right? So That's including that as well. And also he says, you are chayav on Sukkos, Chag and Pesach, you can't eat chometz. He goes into that's why it's also considered a sign. But then he brings a Yerushalmi, we won't have time to see that, but he brings a whole story in Yerushalmi that seems to imply that you are, that there is a mitzvah of tefillin on Chol Hamoed. And he says that he finishes off. That's what people. That seems to be the common practice that people do wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed. So both perspectives are brought in that Tosfos. Says the Mishnah Berura here. Mishnah, firstly, he brings this idea of why is Chol Hamoed considered to be an ois, a sign, sifkot and vov. He says, Pesach, you've got eating matzah, sukkah, you've got sitting in a sukkah, and therefore they are considered to be a sign. The second view holds that since you're allowed to Matorim Asiyas Malacha, because you're allowed to do Malacha on Chol Hamoed, Min Torah, right? There's no ois. There's not considered to be a sign. It's all to do with what you're forbidden in terms of the forbidden labor aspect, right? And that doesn't apply on Chol Hamoed, and therefore it's not considered to be a sign. Okay. The next sifkot, he just talks about when you take off your tefillin. He says you should do so before Hallel. I'm just going to paraphrase this quickly, right? And he says that some people take them off after Kedusha of Shemona Esra. Interestingly, they discuss, is that not a problem? Elsewhere, the post can talk about the fact that those who wear tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam should not put them on during Chazoras Hashatz. Why? Because that's a distraction from what they should be concentrating on Chazoras Hashatz. But he says that taking off tefillin is not such an issue because that doesn't require that mental concentration that putting on tefillin does. And we know that normally we do this. We take off our tefillin on Chol Hamoed during Chazoras Hashatz. We're ready for Hallel, with the exception. I think this in some places, right? First day Chol Hamoed. First day Chol Hamoed. Pesach. That's right. To keep them on for laning, because the laning is that. So he doesn't bring the Mishnah Berura, doesn't bring that, but that seems to be the common practice for those who wear tefillin, of course. So, and the next Sif Ches, what he then says is like this. Why does the Ramah say that you make the bracha, that he says, the Ramah says you make the bracha quietly. Why is this? Because he says, since some wear and some don't wear, right? Or don't make a bracha. Therefore, yesh levarach b'chashai kadesh lo l'dei machlokas. Preventing machlokas is massively important. Those who are following Mishnah Berura in the morning, I know it's only on recorded now, will see it's incredible. All those ifim there about the appointment of Shliach Tzibur, it's just amazing. Just the emphasis on preventing machlokas is so powerful, right? So here as well, make the bracha quietly, not to cause machlokas. He says you shouldn't go in the public, in the street, to shul for that reason on Chol Hamoed. Now he says the Mishnah Berura paskins not to make a bracha. That's how he paskins. Better to wear them without a bracha. Whenever we have a doubt over a bracha, we don't make a bracha. And he says especially because, again, the Vilna Gaon, we don't have time to see this in any detail, but the Vilna Gaon holds he holds that there is no real source in Shas for the Yesh Omrim to wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed. He's very opposed to the whole idea of wearing tefillin, which of course is why in Eretz Yisrael, where the Ashkenazi Kehillas certainly was set up by the Talmidim or the Vilna Gaon, why the minig in Eretz Yisrael is not to wear tefillin, amongst all Ashkenaz, everyone, right, in Eretz Yisrael, because the Vilna Gaon was very opposed to wearing tefillin on Chol Hamoed. He held there was no source in the Gemara for it. The reason why he says there's no source is because he says the Gemaras that you find that seem to imply there is a mitzvah to wear tefillin, right, like the ones that that Tosfos brings, he says that's because they hold Shabbos Zman tefillin. You with me? If you hold Shabbos is a Zman tefillin, is a mitzvah to wear tefillin on Shabbos, well then of course there is on Chol Hamoed. But we don't hold like that, says the Vilna Gaon. We hold Shabbos loves Zman tefillin. And if you hold Shabbos is not a Zman tefillin, then of course Chol Hamoed is also not a Zman tefillin. It goes hand in hand. That's the Vilna Gaon's argument. And therefore he says the Mishnah Berura, you should definitely be machmir when it comes to making a bracha. Again, I don't think there are different minhagim here. Some people have the minhag not to wear tefillin, some of the minhag to wear tefillin without a bracha, some of tefillin to wear tefillin with a bracha like the Ramah. But even those who make a bracha make it quietly. That's clear, right? If they do say a bracha on Chol Hamoed, right? To avoid machlokas. According to Mishnah Berura says you don't make a bracha. He goes on to say that before you put them on, you should make a t'nai. You should make a condition in your mind. If I'm obligated, I'm wearing them as a mitzvah. love, and if not, this shouldn't be a mitzvah. And he says, if you do that, you'll be yotzi according to everyone. Because even those who say Chol Hamoed is not zman tefillin, you're not over Bal Tosef, because then you're making this condition. You're not intending it to be a mitzvah if there is no mitzvah to wear them, right? So they won't be Bal Tosef, right? And Kol Shkin, he says, you're definitely not cheapening the sign of Chol Hamoed, because again, the issue of cheapening the sign, zilzal, only applies to Shem Mitzvah, as we explained before. You see why understanding this whole thing about Chol Hamoed is essential to understand about Shabbos, right? You can't understand the whole business here on Chol Hamoed without understanding how it works with Shabbos. Then he says, Tefillin Rabbeinu time, you don't wear Chol Hamoed, according to everyone. And he then finally brings this point about machlokas. It's not correct. Some should wear and some don't wear because of lo siskoda do. And someone who doesn't wear tefillin or Chol Hamoed, who doesn't sure what they do, he should put them on, but without a bracha. But a tzibur where their minhag is to wear tefillin, they should not change their minhag, right? I know everyone's going to say, nowadays in shuls, including ours, it's a half-half. It's all over the place. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But it's the facts on the ground, you might say, right? That some people do and some people don't. I know that there are. I know of at least. I'm not going to quote who it is. There's at least one United Synagogue rabbi who his minhag is not to wear tefillin. In most US shuls, it's absolutely the minhag to wear tefillin. If people don't, there's one or two who don't, but almost everyone should. And I think therefore there's a problem of lo siskoda to do. If you're in a shul where 99% are wearing tefillin, it's a real issue not to wear tefillin, right? And there is a particular Rav who I heard, I think he once explained it to us, he has posel Chol Hamoed tefillin. Remarkable. He has a pair of tefillin without parshas in, which he wears in shul on Chol Hamoed. A very senior Rav in the United States. Anyway, so this is a fascinating little anecdote there. So there we are. There again, there is. I'm sure there's more to talk about, but we're out of time. Anyone points? Yeah.
I wonder why there's no stronger reason to wear them specifically, for example, on Chol Hamoed Pesach. I mean, we say that it's the reason we wear tefillin is Shniska Nisim Niflo Shetzionim Mitzrayim. Why is it perhaps not that there's an added reason to wear them on Chol Hamoed Pesach when that is one of the whole reasons why we wear tefillin is to remind us of Yetzias Mitzrayim?
That's really interesting. That's a very, very interesting point. It seems to be specifically because, if the function of tefillin, so to speak, not that sounds to cheapen it, but, it is as a sign, if you hold that Chol Hamoed itself has that ois, the risk in reducing, damaging, so to speak, the sign of Chol Hamoed is a problem. The Beis Yosef, one of the reasons people get very passionate about tefillin Chol Hamoed, you'll notice that people who don't wear tefillin Chol Hamoed, I've noticed this before, right? I'll get very, very upset if you try and sort of talk to them about, well, there are those who wear tefillin. They sort of, if they're up there, and actually there is the grounds why people feel so strongly about it is actually based on the Zohar. The Zohar is speaks very, very, very strong language against wearing tefillin on Chol Hamoed. Now, I'm not saying we don't hold like that. I say we. I don't. Those of us who follow, Minhag Ashkenazim generally here or many people in Chutz La'aretz don't follow that. But there is the Beis Yosef here in this siman brings a very long piece from the Zohar, right? He says the Kol B'nai Sfarad are not noeg to wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed. And he says, since it's not clear in the Gemara, he says, Mi yarav liboy la geshes la'avar b'kum aseh al divrei Rabbi Shun ben Yochai, right? Hamafle kol kach besan. Who's going to go, right, and do a mitzvah aseh, right, against or kum aseh, not mitzvah aseh, get up and do something against Shun ben Yochai, who is so clearly so against it in the Zohar, right? So I haven't seen this inside properly the whole piece in the Zohar, but presumably it's all to do with the significance of Yom Tov and and tefillin in some way jars with that. Yeah.
My point is that if anything, it re-emphasizes the point of Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's not a contradiction in being an opposite os. It's all together.
It seems to be. I take the point exactly. It must be. This is in the spiritual realms of understanding, how and what tefillin is. Meaning, I'm sure this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is obviously mainly we focused on the halacha, but in machshava, there must be much, much more to this into what tefillin are. It must go to the heart of what it is, if you like, what tefillin are. Yeah.
I first of all, anecdotally, I think if you put a tefillin on in Israel, you'll get shot on Chol Hamoed. They'll chase you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right, and you cannot wear tefillin. Certainly not in public. If one is in Eretz Yisrael, the Shevet HaLevi, they bring in the Shul Shevet HaLevi says someone who goes to Eretz Yisrael and then doesn't wear tefillin, he's not called being, going against the minhag avosov, the minhag of his own family, if he doesn't wear tefillin while he's in Eretz Yisrael. Why? The whole minhag was only ever in Chutz La'aretz. There is no minhag, he says, to wear tefillin in Eretz Yisrael. Right? The minhag is not to wear tefillin in Eretz Yisrael. There's also Michael Tukachinsky also says that. I think there may be some who wear them privately, tefillin in Eretz Yisrael.
I think B'nai Chutz La'aretz, if they're visiting, they're recommended to put tefillin on at home.
In private.
Yeah, but the other thing I noticed, Rabbi, was in the Mishnah Berura, where it says that you should say the bracha quietly, because that to avoid any machlokes, and yet you're wearing your tefillin in all their glory. And rubbing people's nose in it, but the way you're getting around the machlokes point is by saying the bracha quietly.
Yeah, it's interesting that. Well, it must be to do with the fact that people who know.
They might have worn them all day.
Yeah, no, and people also who know the sugya, will understand that there are, once you're making a bracha, if you think about it, they're going to say you're making a definite statement that you're definitely obligated. If you don't make a bracha, they can say, well, he's not sure, so that's why he's wearing them. It's a sensitivity to machlokas. You find throughout the Mishnah Berura, and halacha generally, there's so much you learn. There's so much you learn from halacha in the way to behave, and generally, even beyond, it all goes together. That's the beauty of learning halacha generally as well. You learn it all from there. Interestingly enough, as a one final point, you bring here that the Vilna Gaon would get up very early on Isru Chag to put tefillin on. Okay. To show how beloved tefillin was to him, is because he hadn't worn them the whole of Yom Tov. So Vilna Gaon was a main proponent not to wear Chol Hamoed, but he would get up especially early on Isru Chag to put his tefillin on because he missed wearing them. Anyway, there you go. Okay, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining. Sorry, it was a little bit longer than expected, but at least we covered the whole sugya. Okay, take care. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for joining.